Hi everybody, and welcome to this session, which is what we learned about visitors during COVID-19. I'm Ruth Hyde. I work for the Woodland Trust, and I've got with me today Alice Cheyne, who's from Forestry, England, and Simon Garrett, who's from the Bristol Zoo. Now, I just wanted to start this off with a bit of a reminder, in case we needed it, about all of our experiences during lockdown. And it's fair to say it was different for everybody. So some places were closed straight away. Some places were completely inundated. That was certainly an experience that we had, and it became really difficult to control the number of visitors coming to our sites. We've had online opportunities, and we've had to kind of change and look at the way that we engage with our visitors. And this is what this session is really about today. So Alice is going to tell us a bit about the research that Forestry England have done about visitors and how they've changed. Simon is going to pick up about the challenges being faced by, I use the word smallish because I don't think it's that small, paid for sites with the number of restrictions that have been put in place for those sorts of attractions. And then we want to have a real discussion afterwards about the experiences that we've learned, what the opportunities are, and we really want your feedback. So at the end of this session, it'd be nice, I'd like to think that everybody will go away with something that they've learned and something that they can do differently in terms of their visitors. So very much an interactive session, looking forward to getting your comments. And so with no further ado, let's go to Alice, and she's going to give us this bit of information about how visitors have changed from the Forestry England perspective.
Thank you, Ruth. Hello, everybody. So I'm Alice, as Ruth said. I'm Head of Marketing and Supported Development at Forestry England, and it's really good to join everyone today. I hope you've enjoyed the conference so far. And before I get into the details of what I'm going to share, I just want to say a bit more about who we are, because some of you may not know. So next slide, please. So first and foremost, we manage our publicly owned forests on behalf of the nation in England. And we're the largest landowner in England, and we're also the country's largest provider of softwood timber. And it's all grown in the most sustainable way, as certified by things like the UK Woodland Assurance Standard, FSC and PEFC. So we grow trees, and we have done for 100 years. And that is at the core of what we do. Next slide, please. And we're also the largest single provider of countryside leisure visits in England, and we have more than 230 million visits to our forests every year. Next slide. And the great thing is that 99% of people live within an hour's drive of one of our forests. So for us here in the west of England, you may be familiar with the National Arboretum at Westonbirt. We've got Lee Woods in Bristol, we've got Stock Hill and East Hartpury Woods in the Mendips, all the way down to Holden Forest in Exeter and Greatwood in the Quantocks, and many more in between, and of course across the country. And as well as some of the more classic activities that you might expect people to do in our forests, like walking and mountain biking, they're also the backdrop for so many other activities as well, as you can see on the slide. So how have our visitors changed since the pandemic started? Well, to find out, we did a couple of things. First of all, we asked our teams on site for feedback, of course. And also between the 22nd of June and the 8th of July, we did a survey on our website, which was really to ask people questions about the most recent visit that they had to one of our forests. And we had over 10,000 responses, which is great. And at the same time, our colleagues in forest research, who basically look at all things to do with forests from a very scientific perspective, whether that's soil quality or carbon sequestration, they also do social research as well. And they did a project to look at people's engagement with nature before and during the COVID-19 restrictions. And that research is obviously wider than just Forestry England, but the country as a whole. Next slide, please. So first up, I've got some insight from forest research, which is around how visits to nature changed before and during the COVID-19 restrictions. So apologies is a bit small, But basically the green is the number of visits before COVID-19, and then the orange is during lockdown. So what you can see is that some types of locations maintained relatively high numbers during the lockdown period, which was basically mid-March to mid-May, whereas others did take quite a big hit. So luckily for us, Woodlands and Forest did maintain a good number of visits, although we did see a significant drop at many of our sites during the travel ban, particularly in more remote places. And obviously things like fields, farmland, countryside did okay because obviously they're open access. However, beaches and the coast had a large drop in the number of visits, presumably because they're only really accessible to people who are very local. And understandably, some of the things like nature reserves, historic properties, and some of the more pay on entry type places were forced to close during the lockdowns, obviously saw a significant decrease. Next slide, please. So then on the 10th of May, Boris Johnson announced that people could travel to exercise, which had obviously been greatly restricted beforehand. And then in the following months, as the lockdown measures eased further, we saw a huge increase in the number of people visiting our sites. And in many places, we were busier than we had ever been before. And we were having to close car parks to just stop more and more people pouring in. And we're also having to deal with quite a high increase in things like litter dropping, people parking illegally or poorly, and unfortunately some antisocial behaviour towards some of our staff. And visits to our website also significantly increased as people were clicking on the coronavirus information pages and the forest pages to see what was open and then plan their visit. Next slide, please. So one of the key things that we found is that we had an increase in younger visitors in the age 16 to 34 range, and then a decrease in older visitors age 55 plus. And this was also supported by our web data, which showed that the 25 to 34-year-old age group now forms 31% of our audience online, compared to 21% previously. And all age groups over 45 have seen falls in the percentage of the web audience too. And this makes sense with older people in the population potentially being a bit more cautious about going out and about than younger people, and also more likely to be shielding or isolating. Next slide, please. And then on-site feedback also suggested that we had some new types of visitors based on different characteristics that they were seeing. Although, of course, it did vary depending on the location of each forest and the local demographic. But some of the key things that we saw was more people who had travelled from nearby towns and cities, so much more of an urban audience, not just the local rural audience. And some of those people had travelled quite long distances to get there. Also an increase in people not necessarily dressed in what we would call outdoor clothing. So people much more casually dressed, not necessarily with walking boots and, outdoor coats and things, but also an increase in Black and minority ethnic visitors, particularly in central England, and in general, just a wider representation of all socio-demographic groups. So it was like everyone was coming to the forest. And then in terms of some of the behaviours that we saw, there was definitely, as I said, an increase in the amount of litter that we were having to deal with and other antisocial behaviour. More people asking for help and where to go and what to do when they were on site, so a bit more dependent on kind of staff on site being able to show them where to go. And also a massive increase in people cycling. And I think we heard that, after lockdown, that there was this massive increase in people buying bikes and they all sold out. So that ties in quite nicely with that. Next slide, please. And what we found overall is that beyond our core audience, which is mainly families, dog walkers, people like that, who were still very much visiting in abundance, we also saw two new visitor types emerging. And we did some audience segmentation work a few years ago. So we've looked at this in terms of the different audience segments and how they're described in that report. So linked in with what I said earlier about age, in most places we had an increase in the number of groups of teenagers, young people who were visiting either alone or with people the same age as them. So basically people in groups, couples, but not with children. And this is an audience that we certainly hadn't seen much of before. And we've also seen an increase in the number of 45 to 55-year-olds visiting without children either. So again, alone or in couples or people of a similar age. And in both groups, when we asked on the survey what they did when they visited, they were most likely to say walking, cycling and photography. And that was significantly higher than what the benchmark was for those activities. So this new audience falls into what we call the hipster followers. And this is defined by adults without children, higher than average income generally, living in cities or towns, and they're generally on the lookout for what we would describe as unique experiences, something a bit different, and they really enjoy taking photographs and they enjoy sharing on social media. And then for our second emerging group, the fair weather families. So we already have a lot of families visiting, but generally they're quite active and adventurous. They would come to do walking or cycling, or they take part in activities as a family. And we call these our den builders. But we saw an increase in a slightly different type of family, generally younger, with younger children, who had a significantly higher interest in what was described as having a day out. And also they were much, much more likely than our benchmark to bring a picnic. So these fair weather families are potentially on the less adventurous side. They're more looking for just a nice day out with the family, nothing too exhausting, and they look for value and familiarity as well. Next slide, please. So this is all great, but the big question for us is this a blip, or will these new people come back? Or once the pandemic is over, will they go back to whatever it was they were doing before, whether it was shopping or cinema, theatre, holidays? Well, since May, we haven't seen any sign of our visitor numbers dropping. The good weather has come and gone and more places have reopened, but people are still coming. And in our survey on the website, only 4.4% of the new visitors said that one of the reasons they visited was because it was the only green space open. So that means the vast majority of people obviously had another reason to visit. And then alongside that, 91% of the new visitors rated their visit as very good or excellent. And so hopefully this will give them another reason to come back. And we've also seen a massive increase in the amount of memberships we've sold since June. And of our July sales, nearly half of those people had never been a member before. So the fact that they've invested in membership means they're likely to return. So we're kind of confident this isn't just a blip, which is great. So I won't dwell too much on challenges and opportunities now, as we're going to come on to that in a bit. But I'll just say, I mean, COVID-19 did hit Forestry England hard financially, because for several months we did have very few visitors, and we've had to cancel most of our events and things, and other activities which would normally bring income for us to help continue to care for our forests. But we had a huge increase of visitors after the lockdown, and despite the challenges of welcoming more visitors than we normally have, we are delighted that so many more people are enjoying the benefits of spending time in forests. And we are proactively engaging with the new audience so that we can help build their connection with forests and nature. And just before I end my presentation, it's worth noting that interestingly across all of our new visitor group, regardless of age or demographic, they all said that they were significantly more likely to want to come to a forest to connect with nature. So connecting with nature was one of the drivers for their visit, compared to the same survey, but the people who said that they'd been before or were existing visitors. And we know that there's been increased coverage and awareness across the media of the need to support mental and physical health by engaging with nature. And I think that's led to more people exploring the outdoors. Next slide, please. So I'll just leave you with one more slide from Forest Research, which shows how connected to nature people felt during the lockdown. So we've got 3 questions there in those bars that people were asked. And females were significantly more likely to report an increase in nature connectedness than males. And time taken to appreciate nature was the score significantly more highly than the other 2 questions. So it really is something that is at the forefront of people's minds. And if you're interested in seeing the full report from Forest Research, because there's many more areas they looked into, like physical and mental well-being, and also people's motivations for getting outside during the lockdown, then I'll just drop the URL into the chat now and you can take a look. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Alice. Now, before we move on to Simon, whose experience was very different, just want to let you know that we've got a poll running, and it's really quite basic. It's about, did you get more, less visitors, and was that a good or a bad thing? So do please have a look at the poll and let us know what you think. It'd be just great to get an idea of how this has impacted you. Right, moving on to Simon. As I say, very different experience there. Simon, please. Simon, we can't hear you.
Mistake, not muting myself. There we go. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk from my experience of being head of public engagement for Bristol Zoological Society. So we have Bristol Zoo Gardens and we have the Wild Place Project. And of course, during lockdown, actually our experience was very different in that actually, well, for the first bit, before we were actually asked to close and told to close by government, we were almost closed by default because people weren't allowed to go out and visit places. So very quickly, earlier in the year, we were closed, and for the longest period for our history. And then, of course, we opened again. But when we opened, we were opening with very restricted numbers, because so even though lots of people wanted to come, actually it was very difficult. The first place we opened actually was the Wild Place Project. Now, for those of you who don't know it, this is 136 acres. It's an old country estate out near Cribbs Causeway in the northwest of Bristol. And we've got a new exhibit there actually, which is called Bear Wood. And if you go into the expo area of this conference, you'll be able to see a nice video of the bears there. And it's very open and it's very outdoors. And so setting up a one-way system there, and we've got very few indoor spaces, that was much easier. So we opened that place first, and then we opened Bristol Zoo a few weeks later, which being a much smaller site at only 12 acres and with lots of indoor houses. You know, we've got a bug world and, you know, an aquarium and a reptile house and lots of places where they're all kind of dead ends. So the difficulty of actually opening to visitors was very hard, and so we actually had to even when we were open, we had to have capped numbers on both sites. And they were given, you had to buy a ticket in advance, you had to buy it online, and you had to buy a particular timed slot as well. So everything was focused around health and safety, which it had to be. You know, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and it's very important that people are able to get out and about and visit places they want to, but to do so in a safe way. And it's up, when you've got a paid for sites like us, it's our responsibility to make sure that they run as safely as possible. So one-way systems, thousands of extra signs to show which way to go round. We had volunteer navigators who were brilliant in actually helping people to navigate around the site and know where they could go and where they couldn't go. But the other big challenge for us was that even though we were open and with capped numbers, so financially that was really, really hard for us, because obviously particularly at Easter and particularly in the summer holidays, that's when we actually get most of our income to be able to maintain our collections and do our education and conservation work throughout the year. So having our numbers severely limited during that time has been a big financial hit for us. And the other hit it's been is actually in what we can do to engage people. So most of the time when we're open, we want people to actually engage and learn and have fun. And a lot of that, and what I've been pushing over the years, and we've done on both sites, is having rangers, for example, and our volunteers out and about around the site with props and doing talks and talking and running games. And of course, all of those had to go even when we were open. It was completely gone when we were locked down and closed. When of course we've still got all of the expenses of, you know, still looking after our animals, so we couldn't furlough all of our staff and save money that way, because, you know, you can't furlough a lion, for example. You still have to have people come in and look after them. So the whole place has got to be COVID secure, even when we're closed, for the staff that we have working here. But as I say, even when we were open, all of the things that were about us engaging people, we then had to stop doing. You can't do talks because it's encouraging people to gather in groups, and we're not allowed to do that. You can't show props and share those around. You know, we normally would have, you know, skulls, in most cases, replica skulls. One skull, this is amazing. amazing. We can't do any of that because, again, it's requiring people to get close and then to touch things. So basically, all of the things that made us zooey, if you like, apart from having the animals that people could come and look at, were basically wiped out. Now, many zoos took the opportunity to do, even during lockdown, actually to do some shifting to online. So I was at the International Zoo Educators meeting a couple of weeks ago, of course, all online, and the British and Irish Associated Zoo Educators meeting last week. And some zoos managed to actually shift some of their engagement online and actually do live sessions and even live tours, carrying a phone around the zoo and actually doing things that way. But in some senses, that's very divorced from the thing that zoos are about, is that real connection, the real animal, the real size, the real smell, the real close-up conversations with people. So it's been for us a real challenge, simply because unlike other places where people have been going and increasing and going in droves, for us, when we wanted people to be coming in droves, actually all of the things we normally did, we've had to curtail, both in numbers and then in how we actually engage while we're here, while they were here. So, and the other thing to mention is, it was, I hope I'm not sounding like, oh, it's been so terrible for us, but the other things that people don't think about is, of course, when the government announces guidelines for certain places opening, we've also got to think about the retail rules and the restaurant and catering rules, because we have a restaurant on site and we have a retail shop on site. So when you're looking at when we're about to reopen and which government regulations we have to abide by, we have to look across the whole piece, because we're actually a bit of everything. So the whole thing has been an amazing learning experience for us. And what I'd like to sort of think of now and for the rest of this is to talk about how we take all of these learnings and the things that we've found out and actually take these on into the future, and which things we can keep doing and which things we're going to have to find some way of doing things differently in the future. So yes, very different experience for us for places where we rely on visitors to come to us, and we've done our best to get them in, but it's been very different.
Thanks for that, Simon. Right, before we move on to the next bit, just having a little look at the poll, and most people said more visitors, so 45% more visitors, which is a good thing. Interestingly, 34% said more visitors, which wasn't so good because it was too many. A relatively smaller number had fewer visitors, which was a problem, and actually one person said fewer visitors, which is actually a good thing. So it's an interesting mix there, but generally it's the more visitors and the impact of that. Now we're in a different position to both Alice and Simon in terms of all of our estate is open and free the whole time. So our challenges were actually always car park related, and the impact on local communities, because we don't have big car parks, and it was the parking everywhere and anywhere. So we had to close just to make it easier for people. And then there was also, which I think, going back to some of the things that Simon said, is what do you do? How do you engage with visitors differently? And we had a lot of stuff on our website in terms of how you could do things with your families in your own garden for the early stage of lockdown, because we wanted to keep that connection with nature. And we accepted that actually a lot of our activity, which would be part of our membership package, we actually provided for free, because we felt it was important to keep that, to start that engagement and keep people interested in what we were doing. And also to kind of help out, because there's a sort of felt like there was something morally to actually help to keep people's spirits up. And I live next door to a family of 3 small children. I know this because every day I could hear them arguing in the garden. And actually it was thinking about people like them and how do they cope when they've got 3 very active children, very, very active in the garden, and not really anywhere for them to go. So we looked at that as part of a change in our communications. And we also tested things. So one of the things that we tried was what 3 words on one of our sites, which was actually trying to help people engage while they were on one of our sites without people being around. Because actually, I think all of us have that. It's the engagement with people and our staff and our volunteers that makes the difference. So I'd be really interested, and I'm going to start with Alice on this one. How did you adapt your comms or your channels to deal with some of these challenges that we had?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially when we were in full lockdown and we knew that people couldn't get out and about and couldn't travel, and like you, we were shutting places. One of the things we did do is shift our focus onto being a lot more online and bringing what we were saying, bringing the forest to you. So one of the things we created was an email for families called Forest Fix. So it was about people getting their forest fix, and it was packed full of ideas and activities and things that people could do at home to keep them amused and kind of engaged with nature. And we also promoted content that was more about staying active at home. And also we repurposed some of our other things that we'd already had. So for example, we had a partnership with Aardman on Shaun the Sheep a while back. And so we repurposed the activity packs for people to be able to use in their garden or their local green space. Because as you say, Ruth, it's not just about us all this time. It's about helping people. And we knew that, well-being was such an important issue during lockdown. And it was about what can we do to actually support people, because we know how important it is that people do have that connection with nature when they're in a stressful and unpredictable situation. I think once we kind of came out of lockdown and it was much more about like dealing with the massive amount of visitors, we really had to kind of target our communications on just supporting people to be responsible when they were visiting. So we had a lot of focus on signage on site, because obviously that's where people are going to see it. So it was obviously all the stuff about social distancing, but also about not dropping litter. And we worked closely with DEFRA and Keep Britain Tidy on this, because obviously this wasn't unique to Forestry England, like everywhere, all the countryside was experiencing these problems. So there was a big push on things around litter, signage, as I mentioned, and then kind of moving forward, we're just trying to adapt to some of our new audiences. So we've got our core audiences. We have a really good marketing and communications plan about engaging with them. So it's just about looking at what we already have planned and tweaking it slightly to kind of slightly appeal more to the hipster followers or appeal more to the fair weather families. So we've done stuff which is almost like back to basics, like what to expect when you visit a forest, even things like what to wear, what to bring, because we know that people were turning up unprepared at times. And all this information we had on our website too. And it's about kind of just tweaking content to make sure that it's kind of suitable for the new audiences that we're finding.
I think it's interesting. There's a comment on the chat from Susie Schilling, and she said the vast visitors we've tended to be less educated in how to behave in the country, which has led to upset with locals. And we certainly found that in terms of parking over gateways, which was seems to be a classic. If in doubt, block somebody in, which obviously went down incredibly well. And I think one of the challenges we have is people were out there. We didn't have a lot of staff out there. We don't actually have a lot of staff on site. And I think that's one of the challenges going forward is there's an assumption that everybody knows what to do in the countryside. Open a gate, not open a gate, take your litter away with you. And all of those sorts of things are challenges that I don't think is something we can necessarily sort ourselves as individuals, but needs that bigger, it needs everybody behind it. Because if you think about it, we've gone from nothing to 100 miles an hour, and there's all those people who are desperate to get outside, want to enjoy it, but actually it's different for them. And how do we accommodate that? And I think that's going to be quite a challenge going forward.
I think it is about making it more accessible as well. And I think, like you were saying, we have this thing that people don't know how to behave. But I think there's also a lot of people aren't confident necessarily in going to a new place that's an outdoor space. There's no indoor space, and they've just got to kind of get on with it. So it's kind of being as useful to those people as we can. And some of the comments that we've had back on our website in terms of feedback from people is that they want to know things like how far is it from the car park to the visitor centre. Yeah. And we've had a massive amount of people coming to us saying, we want to see your maps online because we want to be able to see how long the trails are. We want to know, we're going to get from the car park, we're going to get here, we're going to do a trail, it's going to take us this long. There's maybe more of these new audiences are less prepared to just turn up and have a go because it's maybe not their comfort zone. So we're trying to be as useful as possible to those people as well and make sure that it is accessible to everybody to turn up and have a great time.
So Simon, obviously a completely different ball game there. And you said you'd obviously been at a conference with other zoos. Were there any top tips that people came up with in terms of how to make that change in terms of engagement, but actually having to do it quite quickly as well. I mean, that's part of the challenge, surely.
Yeah. Some of it was to do with, it was very interesting actually, is not worrying about expensive kit, because for those who went online and did lots of online stuff, and everyone else was saying, well, how did you do that? You know, what kind of kit did you have? What kind of software? And they went, I used my mobile phone. And it's just, they literally just pivoted. And one of the really interesting things was, and this is something that we did here as well, we found that one advantage to going online when people actually can't visit is that you suddenly increase your audience massively. So we run conservation lectures here once a month, usually with our own staff, but sometimes with external speakers as well. And sometimes we would have got, 40 or 50 people along to those in a room, sometimes as few as 15. As soon as they went online, we were getting audiences of 100, 200, 300. So that's something we'll probably continue doing. And one, I can't remember which zoo it was now, but I think it may have been Dublin Zoo. We're talking about some of the things that they'd done and taken some of their sessions and kind of converted them into online. And they said they were just looking for someone who had a friend in Antarctica, because that was the only continent they hadn't reached now. So that was just really interesting, that because people were forced to do something on a different platform and think outside the box of just visitors and people coming on site, that it almost opened up new avenues that people hadn't really thought about, and actually were moderately easy to do just with a mobile phone and some free software.
I mean, it's interesting, the online conversion, and we have, and this is slightly out of date information, but only something like 4% of our members actually visit our own woods. Now, it could be that they're visiting elsewhere. So we started putting some of our activity online, and one of our most popular activities, which has been going for 3 years now, is our Osprey Cam. Now, our Osprey Cam is in the back end of Beyond in Scotland, and actually, even if you went to the site, you wouldn't be able to see the Osprey anyway, because it's obviously at the top of a tree. But the following that we got for that this year, it was the equivalent, I would say, of Coronation Street for anybody who's interested in the outdoors, and the amount of engagement, the amount of involvement, and that ability to see something and experience nature that you wouldn't actually get if you were on site was really powerful. And I think, with some of the things that we have, actually, you get a better experience online. I'm not saying that's the case for everything, but certainly for something like that, you would never get the chance to get close and see the eggs being laid and seeing the first flight and all those different activities. So there were definitely positives, and we had a lot of engagement with everything we did online in terms of our members and supporters. But I wonder that there will come a point, and I'd be interested in your views on, there comes a point where people are getting a bit bored with virtual, and they want to be outside again, and they don't necessarily want to be using their phones and technology. So, and I'm going to start with Simon on this one, just put you on the spot there. Yeah. Where do you think we need to go with that? Where will that point come, and how do we respond to that?
I mean, I think we're going to end up with something. It's interesting. We do quite a lot of higher education work at Bristol Zoo here as well. So we run 6 degree courses here. And of course, lots of universities have moved into what's called hybrid learning. Sometimes they're face-to-face here, and sometimes we're teaching online. And I think, the zooiness of the zoo visit is about the real stuff and getting out there. So that's what we're going to go back to majoring on. And so we'll rebuild as soon as we're able to, and thank goodness, fingers crossed, the vaccines are coming, to allow people to stop and have those conversations and begin to actually start touching things again and having activities closer together. But I think there's also an opportunity for using the skills that people have picked up with things like online, where I suppose it's like, office work as well, and all the people going, well, I suppose we could do a video conference, but actually it's much better to meet in person. So everybody always did. And we've broken that habit. And now actually, here we are having an amazing conference all online. And there is some benefit to that. So I think moving forward, it's a question of picking the best of what we're used to do, but also picking the best of the new things we've learned to do, and cementing those two things together, and actually probably therefore having a bigger reach. I mean, we at the moment are taking the opportunity to actually think hard about all the things we did before and go, actually, as there's an opportunity again, do we really want to do those things again? Or actually, do we want to do things slightly differently because we've had this weirdly caused opportunity to stop and think rather than just doing the same that we've always been doing.
So Alice, have you got anything to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can never take away from the real thing, which is getting out and experiencing it, and that is what people want. But I agree with Simon. I don't think that the online is ever going to go away, and I think what's happened is it's just pushed us to really explore new ways of doing things to make it almost like as real as it possibly can be to the actual real thing. So I feel like in Forestry England that we've evolved a lot in particularly in our digital communications during this period. And when you probably look back at the kind of things that we would do to engage people online a year ago, I think we've come a long way, and we're making kind of better use of video, better use of social media. We've done a couple of Instagram lives recently. So we had one at Westonbirt Arboretum, which is where one of our rangers was going around and talking to people about the Arboretum, and it was live. So that's kind of as close as you can get to actually feeling like you're actually there. Which is great, because that's probably, that's pushed us into thinking like that. And also we've done some really nice resources around forest bathing, which is again about people having more of an immersive and mindful experience in a forest. So I think we all want to get back to normal as soon as possible and be able to go out and about. But I think that actually we've learned a lot about how we can continue to do some really engaging stuff online as well.
I think that's really true. We did a couple of Instagram lives, and they were with our partners, so some of our corporate partners, which again was a way to extend our reach, which is always a good thing to do. But also it was a way of actually sharing some of the activity to a broader audience that we wouldn't have had the chance to do before, and we wouldn't have entertained the idea, I don't think, before lockdown. And I think the other thing, and it's you talk about, the live streaming, which has loads of potential to be absolutely disastrous with connections and everything. But I think actually the public and our audiences are much more forgiving. And I think there's something a bit earthier, because a lot of what we want to do, we want it to be very professional. We want it to look perfectly curated. And actually, I think people are really forgiving about that, whether it's 100% perfect or not, because it's actually giving them a more genuine experience. And I think that's the thing that, for me going forward is, it's almost like a bit more, I guess, a bit more quick and dirty, rather than how much time do we spend on doing something, which is great, but actually how many more people could we get to by doing a lot more testing and learning and accepting that it won't be absolutely perfect, but that it will be engaging in a different way. Now, one of the things I'd like to ask is about the age of your audience. So Simon, did your audience change in terms of the age groups, or was it very similar to the sort of age range you had before? Were there any differences in the type and age of visitors you had?
That's a very good question. I don't have any data on that. What I do know is that when we first opened both sites, there was a big rush of members to kind of almost get in there first, because our members tend to be very frequent visitors, and they hadn't been having their fix. So as soon as there was an opportunity, they booked up a lot of the slots, which is lovely. But of course, when financially we need people who are paying to come, but it quickly moved back to a more sort of normal distribution, and so I think probably fairly quickly it moved into the people that would normally come, our normal visitors. It's just that they had to come in particular time slots, but I think probably the same demographic probably. Yeah.
Just picking up a couple of comments here. So Lauren and Steph said they agree. They think audiences are definitely more forgiving about. I love the way Lauren said unpolished content. That sounds so much better than quick and dirty. So thank you, Lauren, for that one. Now I've got a question from Kim for you, Alice, and it was, do you know if that shift in visitor numbers has impacted on your existing visitors? Oops, hang on, that's just disappeared. So the numbers, the behaviours and things like that, and how have you dealt with that? Or actually has everybody been pretty much dealt with it and you can't tell that difference? So have the new types of visitors been a kind of like a force for good? Have they been embraced, or have there been challenges on the back of that?
Yeah, I don't think we have kind of some really hard and fast data on really what our existing visitors have thought of that. All we know is that we've had a massive amount of visitors, so we can only assume that our existing ones are already coming. And I think a lot of people come because they're local and they know it and it's familiar. So I don't think that there would be necessarily a massive kind of people deciding that they're not going to come anymore. I think probably, I mean, I can imagine it would be difficult in some situations where your beloved local forest or woodland is suddenly overrun with visitors, and maybe that does push people to find alternatives. But because we haven't seen a massive drop-off in numbers, and we haven't particularly received, I wouldn't say any specific complaints. I think, like what you said, Ruth, I think it's the really local people that have found it the most challenging, the people that live nearby, because they've had to deal with the extra traffic, the parking problems and all of that. So we have had to do quite a lot of work with kind of local engagement with communities. But we don't think that there's kind of been any detrimental effect on existing visitors at all. And with things like membership sales increasing, I think that's probably a really good sign that people, are committed to coming back to their forests.
I'm just thinking I'm conscious we're getting towards the end of the session. So I'd ask both of you, is there one thing that you've learned that would be an opportunity going forward in terms of what you've learned from COVID-19? And I'm going to start with Simon on that one.
Yeah, I think for me, it is going back to actually thinking very carefully about our digital delivery and actually the advantages of that, it's something we were, I suppose, in a way, so focused on our engagement with the people who visit the sites. And actually, of course, we've got a fantastic digital team who, run all of the social media things as well. So that's been going on. But I think with me thinking about public engagement, actually, there are more things I think we can add to our skill sets and our arsenal in the future of using to actually get our messages out further, and actually using that really well as getting back to what people, when they visit the sites, really want, is being able to get close and talk to people and touch things and experience things and smell things, and do all of that kind of close engagement things. But I think it's forced me, at least, to think of actually there are some big advantages as well of actually doing things well online.
Yeah. And Alice, from your point of view?
I think for me, it's probably more of an organisational thing. I think going through the pandemic, and I think having these massive challenges that we've had, it's really brought us closer together as an organisation in terms of how we work in our national communications and marketing team, and how in touch we are with what's been happening on the ground. I think it's forced there to be a lot more frequent conversations, much more feedback from, what is happening in the real world on the ground. What are people asking? What do people need? Feeding that back up. We've really helped to try and support the kind of the national narrative and the messages, get the signage done, get it all done really quickly. I think it's been a really positive experience, and I think a really good thing that we can kind of continue to work that way in the future, that we're much better connected as an organisation, despite all the challenges with not actually being able to see each other. Teams has obviously been a godsend, but yeah, I think it's really important to make sure that you have that connection throughout your organisation, and that everyone understands kind of what the real picture is, and you're all kind of working towards the same goals.
And if anybody out there has any of their observations, please do put them on the chat. The one thing that you think is the biggest opportunity that we've learned from COVID-19. It'd be lovely to see what your comments are. I think there's, from my point of view, and I think I'd pick up on what Alice said, it was the way we worked across the organisation. And actually, I think all organisations have all their processes, and at one point it was, we need to move more quickly than our processes. And actually, by being not in the office and by being on Zoom, and we were actually ended up being much more nimble in the early days than we would have been, because we would have been bound by, can we find a meeting room? All of those challenges that get in the way of being able to move quite quickly. But I think the other thing was also being quite forgiving and accepting that not everything is going to be perfect in terms of what we put out there, but it's all about having a positive intent in terms of what we do. So Not everything worked perfectly. Some things certainly worked better than others. And you never knew exactly what was going to really pick up and kick off. And you think, right, we'll remember this for next time. But that ability to move swiftly and respond to what was going on, I think that made a big difference. And I think the thing that sticks in my mind from the early days was we were communicating with the whole team on a daily basis because the government advice was changing on a daily basis. And I'm sure everybody was probably in the same situation, was I'm going to leave this right till the end of the day because I know tomorrow the advice could be slightly different again. And how we kept on top of that. And we also have the added challenge, and I think probably, I'm not sure if you have that challenge, Alice, is we work across the whole of the UK. So we would say, this is the story today if you're in England, but if you're in Northern Ireland or Scotland or Wales, actually it's a different story. So everything we had was slightly more complicated on the back of that. So I think that was a real challenge for us. Now I've just got a question from Susie, and she says, how have you targeted those new visitors on social media with channel hashtags, etc.? Do either of you two want to answer that one?
That'd be one for our digital team, so I'm going to sidestep that completely.
So I'd say for us, our fair weather families are probably most likely to be Facebook users. So that's where we'd be targeting them. And as I said, we've done things like blogs specifically about, what people can wear in the forest. We're looking at working with influencers as well on Instagram, both for the fair weather families and the hipster followers. So kind of finding, like the mummy bloggers or the kind of an urban influencer for the hipster followers. Hipster followers definitely, I suppose, are much more the kind of the Instagram. It's about the beautiful images and the unique experiences. So, that's how we're targeting them.
Let's see what other questions we've got here. We've got so what Kirsty Smith saying, it's been really encouraging to see that different types of visitors do want to come. And whilst this does mean we have to adapt our comms and support them with information about visiting, as Alice has said, but does show that we have more opportunity to reach out to different visitor groups. Now, Alice, is there something that you are looking at in terms of Forestry England about capitalising on that, or working with those different groups that you've seen coming or not?
I mean, at this stage, it's really about making sure that what we're doing feels relevant and inspiring to them, and so that they continue to come and visit us. I think that's the main opportunity. It's also about it's one of the big opportunities for us is about telling our story. So, we know that people are coming to visit us because they want to have a nice time in the forest and enhance their well-being. But one of the big challenges for us particularly is around our sustainable forest management kind of narrative about we grow trees, but we harvest trees. And that's not a bad thing because we're actually planting more trees, and we need, wood is a really sustainable resource, but it is a difficult story to tell. But hopefully, once we start off with people and their visitors, we can then kind of, tell our story and sort of, I suppose, sort of help them to learn about who we are and what we're about and how important, the timber industry is for climate change and everything else. So that's kind of, we've got to get people's support before we can kind of build on that story. So yeah, that will definitely be a big opportunity for us.
And do you have, so we have obviously our membership offer, but we also have a sign up and kind of join the cause in terms of that first bit of your first contact with the Woodland Trust. Now, we saw quite a big increase in people just coming to us, wanting more information, wanting to find out more about us. Is that something that you found in terms of Forestry England as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I mentioned, we do have our local membership schemes, but we also just have a subscriber link on our communications so that people can, sign up and they'll get emails from us about things, for example, like the forest fix that I mentioned, so people can get their kind of regular dose of the forest. So yeah, we have seen a big increase in people signing up to that and wanting to know more, and the big increase in our web traffic as well.
Ruth, I think we've hit our time. I've just realised because my My lights have turned off here as well. I have automatic lights in my office, which if I don't move too much for 20 minutes, they turn off.
Well, I did think, I wasn't sure, I thought our session was finishing at 20 and I thought we'd automatically go dark, but
no, I think we have to make ourselves go dark.
So
and this is
in that case, on the basis that Simon has gone dark, can I thank everybody for participating in the polls and your chat. There's some really good conversations taking place there. As I say, Alice has offered to provide a link to the information. So thanks everybody for taking part. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Alice. And enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.